Do we have all the mics we need? All the handhelds? No, I don't need a chair, actually.
Good. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our October Musical Monday. We're going to have a slight variation in the program, and Maestro Stelluto will cover that with the introductions. But first off, we recently elected a president-elect, so I'd just like to have her stand so that you guys can recognize her in the future. That's Amy Kelly. And then just give her a nice welcome. I'd like to thank our hostesses. Ellie Hansen is the overall chair, coordinating with to make sure that we have hostesses and refreshments at every Musical Monday. And she was also the chair for this Musical Monday. And our other hostesses, Nadine Willems, Diane Nolan, Rita Lloyd, Kay Cook, Barb Gertler, and Mary Jane Mattingly. So thank you all. I know things were really delicious, and it's great to be able to do that again. Thanks to Michelle Siebert for helping us coordinate musicians and such for our Musical Mondays. And of course, thanks First Federated for use of their facility. And we're also going to be recording the Musical Monday this morning. We hope to be able to use some of these in the future for some outlying areas, but that's something to go in the future. So I'll turn this over now to Maestro George Stelluto. Maestro?
Hi there. Can you hear me? Everybody can hear me? First order of business, who made the almond cake? Thank you. Excellent. So, you know, the title or the hook of this concert, if you have seen the program book, is A New World, and it certainly is a new world, and one where things are a bit unpredictable. So, unfortunately, our cellist, Richard Herschel, was taken ill and had to back out of the concert for this weekend. And in a testimony to the depth of culture in Peoria, I was meeting with the teacher of your second place winner from the Guild's student competition, who played in September, did a nice job for us. Hi, Elizabeth. And we were talking, and she has New York management. She had just got back from playing the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto with the Williamsburg Symphony. And just out of curiosity, I was like, well, how many concertos do you have under your fingers, like, that you could really bring up fast? Because this happened at Ravinia this summer, where a soloist actually was taken ill during the dress rehearsal and had to go to the hospital, and we had 3 hours notice to try to find a replacement. So these things do happen. But so when I asked her, she gave me a list, and then lo and behold, a week later, I'm going, hey, guess what? We're going to have you play on this concert. So I'd like to introduce to you Yoonju Chung, who is our pianist replacing Richard Herschel. But the fun part of this is we won't get to hear the Dvorak Cello Concerto, but we will get to hear another Mozart Piano Concerto, oddly enough, in C major as well. So Yunju Chung. You have a microphone right there. And Yunju is an accomplished pianist, but she also has quite a pedigree. So she studied at the Eastman School of Music in Vienna. Was it at the Hochschule? The Hochschule? Is that on?
Yeah.
And then she went to Moscow to study, and then came back to Vienna, and then went to the Peabody Institute in Baltimore, where she studied with Leon Fleischer. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so I'm going to have her tell you a little bit about herself, and then she's going to talk a little bit about the concerto that she's going to play for us, and I'm going to ask her a few questions about the concerto. But what I really like about Yunju's background is she has studied with two pianists that one I performed with. He was a soloist with the student orchestra I was in at Yale. And the second one, Leon Fleischer, I actually was conducting in a master class for Beethoven's Emperor Concerto, which he was giving the master class. So I know these two pianists, and I was very excited when she told me about it. Yunju.
Thank you.
Can you turn it up a little bit? Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's a very great opportunity for me to be here and also be able to play with the Peoria Symphony this weekend, and I appreciate the opportunity. I've lived in Peoria for about 10 years. Before that, I was living in Baltimore. I was in school there. And I met my husband, who works at CAT, and had to move here. And since moving to Peoria, we've been kind of in and out of Peoria, since my husband had a couple of overseas assignments. But every time that would come to an end, we would come back to Peoria. So this has been our home for a while now. And it was a pleasure to get to know Maestro Stelluto and to attend several of the Peoria Symphony concerts. So as Maestro said, I've studied in different places. I've had the honor of studying with a Mozart specialist, Peoria, and that opportunity came as a result of losing a competition, a Mozart competition, and Peoria stood up for me. Although I lost, I didn't get a prize, but he stood up for me, and he invited me to come to Vienna and study with him. So after finishing Eastman, I packed my bags and flew to Vienna, 2 huge suitcases. He picked me up from the airport. He put me up at his house, his wife and Eva Badura, and he were very gracious to have me live there, feeding me, letting me practice on his beautiful Bösendorfer. But he was looking in on me on every single minute of my practice, and that was not very nice. He demanded that I get a 40-minute piece ready by the next day, and I had to practice up until 4 a.m. that night, and thinking I should really get out of here.
So that was actually good training for this week, right?
Yes. So I will be playing his cadenza, and he passed about 2 years ago, and it was very sad. I had been out of touch with him for about over 10 years, and he happened to write me an email saying, "Are you still alive?" And that was about 2 years before he passed. And I wrote back to him, and I said that I would go visit him, which I wanted to, but then he passed. He has a book of cadenzas for almost all the Mozart concertos, and he has written about 3 different cadenzas for this concerto, and I picked one of them, and I feel like it's one of the best, adhering to the style of Mozart. I'm not so comfortable with a Mozart concerto with like a Busoni type of cadenza, and I feel like this cadenza is very beautiful. And should I talk about the piece first, or yeah, this concerto is very close to my heart, and I'm sure to many people. It's one of the most beautiful of the 27 concertos that Mozart wrote, and I think it falls in his middle period where I feel like it just plays itself almost. The melodies, the harmonies are written so beautifully that you don't have to do anything, just play the notes and it comes out heavenly. It is about the time when Mozart wanted to become a freelance musician instead of being employed at a church, and he started writing concertos so that he could make money, and they were very well received. He composed his D minor concerto, and within 4 weeks of completing that, he was able to complete this concerto, and he wrote for 482, 466, one of the most beautiful concertos. I feel like as he goes to the end of his life, the music becomes a little bit more sublime. I don't know if you agree, as did with Schubert and Beethoven, and I feel like that's a very profound experience to play. Now the middle period concertos are, I think, easier on the ears and easier on the audience, and but just very eloquent and beautiful. It will speak for itself, I think. So I hope you enjoy.
Great, thank you.
I don't know how much of it would you like me to?
Just try something from every movement and then do the cadenza and then explain beforehand what the cadenza is.
Okay, so
Okay,
yes.
But before you play the cadenza, do that. But play everything else first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things is because Mozart wrote these with him being the soloist in mind, he did not write every single note. Oftentimes he would write like a skeleton, and he would plan on improvising. And this happened a lot in the slow movements, but the cadenza was improvised by the performer at that time. I wish I could improvise a cadenza, but I'm not able to do that. Like Eingangs, little fermatas here and there, he would improvise. That's why he didn't write out the cadenza for most of his concertos. And in the second movement, where he writes something like that, he was planning on improvising something in between those two notes. And he does that in a lot of the concertos. So I will be doing something like. So, and he has that in many of the concertos, especially the second movement. And there's a big cadenza in the first and last movement that I will be playing from Badura Skoda.
Great.
So this is a little excerpt from the first movement. like to hear the theme of the second movement? Here's the third movement. Now I'll be playing a little bit of the Badura's cadenza for the first movement. I will make it as improvisatory as possible.
Thank you. So she had about a week, less than a week's notice that she's going to do this concert, and then she had 1 day's notice this weekend when I asked her to play Musical Monday for us. So we should applaud her again. And it's great because we have, you have the teacher of the person who won second place in your concerto competition, your solo competition. He played last time, she's playing now, and so it's a real pleasure to have you. But I want to ask you, what is a Mozart specialist? What makes a Mozart specialist?
Well, I think that's more self-proclaimed by Mr. Badura. But so he studied not just the performance of these works by Mozart, but he studied the autographs. And the place with the room where I had lessons, he had tons and tons of music and copies and copies of his autographs. He would go back and study what he wrote and what the different editions have been published, and he would demand that I do it the way that Mozart intended. And sometimes it was very different from what the music said. But because Badura made such a good point of what Mozart wanted stylistically, and he would explain all these things. And sometimes he spent most of our lesson time doing that, and I felt like, but I want to play this well. Why wouldn't he teach me how to play it well? But talk about these things, which most people won't agree anyway.
Right.
But now I really do appreciate him researching and try to really find out everything that was going on in Mozart's life, and what other works he was writing at the same time, and where the motives kind of came from, and all these things. And I really do think that he studied a lot.
Yeah, I noticed a Symphony number 40 quote in the cadenza there that you just played.
Oh, yes.
From the opening of the symphony, of the 40th Symphony.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. Thank you, Yunju. I think we're all going to be really looking forward to your performance on, I don't think I know, that we're going to be looking forward to it on Saturday, and hopefully that'll just be the first of several of having you perform with us wherever you're sent to around the world with your husband. So thank you, Yunju.
Thank you so much.
And before we go on to the Dvorak Symphony with my good friend Andrea Molina, who you all know very well from theater productions and musical Mondays and sound bites. Another person we're lucky to have in the community. I should let the Guild know the extent of your educational outreach. So in the back there, you'll see one of your newest members, Angela Smith, is back there. And she's been to many musical Mondays, right? But this is her daughter's first musical Monday. So, you know, you guys are always breaking new ground with people, so you should feel good about your outreach. I mean, it's fun, and we can already tell she's going to be a good listener in future concerts. I want to get my notes out before you get your notes out. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the Dvorak New World Symphony. Everybody thinks they know the New World Symphony. Okay, yeah, we know it's very famous and all that, but what you may not know is that both the concerto and the symphony were written by Dvorak when he was in New York. And he was hired, I'm trying to find my notes here, hold on. He was hired to run a music school. So he was paid, I think, $15,000 by a rather wealthy woman in New York City to come from the Czech Republic, from Prague, with his family to teach there. And he stayed, I think, 3 years, 1892 to 1895. And so the New World Symphony is not just about the New World. There's a lot of kind of not tension, but energy between the old world and the new world. He's writing about his impressions of America back then, but he also there's a lot of nostalgia for his homeland. Maybe it's the Czech beer, but he also a lot of people think that the melodies, like the famous melody in the second movement that we'll play for you eventually, was a spiritual, a black spiritual from the South, and it actually wasn't. He had a student named Burley who studied with him. He was a black composer, and he studied with him in New York, and he would have Burley sing to him these black spirituals from the pre-Civil War days and post-Civil War days in the South, and Dvorak would actually write them down, and so the theme of the second movement actually emulates a Negro spiritual, but it's not actually a Negro spiritual. And for those of you that may not know this, he actually, while he was here, he made a trip to the Midwest and he went out to a Czech community in Wisconsin and spent some time with them out there. I like to think of Dvorak's New World Symphony in relation to what he saw. I don't know if any of you know the artist Albert Bierstadt. He was a German painter who came to the United States and traveled all over the United States, and he wrote these, he painted these paintings of what he saw. So he would do Bryce Canyon and everything, but he would do them on a scale that was huge. So if you go to the Smithsonian, if you go to the galleries in Washington, D.C., you'll see some of these Bierstadts, and they really embody the definition of the word sublime, because that was his response to the landscapes that he saw. And back then, it's kind of an ancient definition, but the word sublime meant something that was so awe-inspiring and beautiful that it was also at the same time a little bit intimidating because of the scale of it. So if you see that, if you see a Bierstadt painting, you'll see that immediately. I encourage you to look it up. But I think this is also inherent in the New World Symphony. And really, you can look at the New World Symphony two ways. You can look at it as a film, right? Or you can look at it as a series of postcards, but not just visual postcards, kind of psychological, musical postcards, because he's going to introduce a number of themes in the first two movements. And the opening, we hear this. So what you hear, it's kind of dreamy, a little bit kind of hazy. And when I was studying this, I was trying to get an image in my head. And if you can imagine yourself sailing into New York Harbor on a foggy morning, and you're kind of sleepy, it's a little foggy, and then out of the fog, you look up and you see the Statue of Liberty for the first time. And the Statue of Liberty was only 7 years old at that time. It came to America in 1886. Dvorak sailed into New York Harbor in 1892. So that bum-bum is kind of supposed to be something that's a little bit frightening, a little bit jarring in the middle of this kind of dreamy, foggy morning as you're finally getting to the New World. Do you have the rest of the? Do you have the rest of the introduction, or just that much? Okay, so some of the things I'm going to tell you today, we're going to hint at, because I don't want to tell the whole story and give it away. So the next theme we hear is the opening of the real opening of the first movement, that da-da-dee-da. It's just kind of a dreamy introduction, and then we have this. So he has very dramatic opening for the real part of the first movement, and I like to think of that as him finally seeing all the activity in New York City. You know, to his amazement, what this huge city was, the energy of it, the things like that. That again, it's very impressive, but he writes it in an E minor. The symphony's in E minor, and he writes it in a minor key with a lot of energy. So it's a little bit frightening, but it's captivating at the same time. And then as we move further into the movement, so that's just a beautiful counter melody in a major key. The whole movement is in what what they call sonata allegro form, which is a very old world form to write a symphony in. So you can see the kind of psychological tension. It's all embedded within it. It's not obvious, but this theme is kind of pleasant. It's exact opposite of that first one, and I don't know, that could be anywhere. You could hear that in maybe, that was a melody he heard his students sing to him. And then we move on to so you hear that little melody. How many of you know the Song of Hiawatha? Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote it. It was the first epic poem in America that did not have, it was all taken from Native American influences and not from, I know I was surprised too, and not taken from any European influences. So this was written, and it was very influential, and there were a lot of composers that tried to write music related to it. And Dvorak is certainly one of them. And the melodies are not necessarily meant as melodies that he would, maybe had words to them. But he said in a lecture in New York City, he said that he was inspired to try to do things that were evocative of the Indian cultures, many of which he may have experienced in his travels from New York to Wisconsin. So the other thing about Dvorak that I discovered when I was playing some of his chamber music and then studying his symphonies is he's a melody writer. He likes to write melodies, but he struggles with development, right? Okay, so I've given you this melody. I can't just repeat it a million times because everybody's going to get bored with it. So he does really very inventive things with these melodies. So sometimes the melodies become the accompaniment figure for the next melody. And oftentimes he's kind of breaking up this melodic material, and you'll hear it in the symphony on Saturday. You'll hear it come about, and you go, wow, I recognize that. Where's it from? It's probably from one of the other melodies, but there's another melody on top of it. So from that we go to second movement. So hold on. So you've got these three melodic ideas. You've got the first one, no. First movement, first melody from the Allegro molto, bum, 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 bum. Oh, sorry, you got it. And then you've got the next one, second one in the first movement. Third one in the first movement. So you've got those three melodies. Now, sometimes he introduces things and you hear them kind of like in the Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto. You hear that famous melody and it never comes back after its first statement. So some of those melodies stay and some of those melodies disappear. But remember that first melody. And now we go to the second movement, and we've got this beautiful opening with the brass. Then you have this famous melody that we all know. So you've got that famous melody. Everybody knows that melody. It's not a spiritual. He made that melody up himself, but he's emulating the spiritual style that his student Burley used to sing to him from those melodies. And then later in the symphony, in the movement, you have that melody, and then you also have this one. So it's just kind of a simple melody, but notice what he's done now. He's given us 3 melodies in the first movement. The first one, the most dramatic. He's given us 3 melodies in the second movement. The first one, the most memorable. And then we go to the third. Is that the last one for that movement? Huh? I think it is, right? We'll go on to the third movement. So then he gives us this idea in the third movement, and it's, I don't even know how to describe it. Let's just listen to it for a second. So you've got this yum bum 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 bum. Well, Dvorak actually said that that is evocative of the Indian cultural dances that he heard in America. He actually said that in a lecture in New York City. So you've got this kind of feeling of this, and then this little melody, da-da-dum bum bum, bum bum ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum bum bum, bum bum ba-da-dum. And then in the middle of this we have, yeah. That's good. That's it. So that's the second melody, and then we have the trio melody. Do you have that one? Bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum, bum. Did I give you that one? Nope. Don't worry about it. Sorry again. Say again. No, that's fine. Not yet. So there's actually a third melody that comes in the trio of this, which is yum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum, beam, bum, beam, which is very European, right? So now you've got 3 melodies in the third movement, and now he's starting to mix things up, right? You have this kind of Indian culture inspiration. You've got this kind of little beautiful melody, major melody as the second one, and then in the trio you've got the European influence in his trio. So again, you're starting to see this kind of either inspiration of the different cultures he's experiencing, or a little bit of melancholy, just wanting to go back to the Czech Republic. Then we have at the end of the coda, what does he do? where'd you hear that first melody from? Play that again, just the melody part. Where did you hear that from? First movement, right? And then he combines it with. So now things are starting to get interesting, right? So I don't know if he's like just kind of coalescing his thoughts from his experiences in the US, but everything's starting to mix up. And then we finally get to the last movement with the famous opening. So that everybody knows that. It's very inspiring. In a way, and this is totally my artistic license interpretively, you could see the kind of driving energy of this opening, of this movement, of this fourth movement. If you can imagine being on the prairies and enjoying the beauty of it, and then suddenly you've got a steam engine just driving relentlessly right through the scene, right? So this whole movement opens with this kind of energy. And then what else do I have from here? Is that it? Oh. So I didn't give you dum, bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, bum. No. So there's yet another major melody. This is where I'm going to not give away everything. What else do I have from this movement? Yeah. Where does that come from? That's good. Where does that come from? Second movement, right? He just combined. Now he's throwing everything into the salad bowl, if you will, the musical salad bowl. Next thing. That's all I gave you? Well, what you're going to hear is everything coming back, and then at the end, a very dramatic ending where different melodies are on top of each other, accompaniment figures are coming from different melody ideas. They're not really the full melody themselves, but you just hear them. And I mean, it's a really genius piece of music that we take for granted because it's played so often. But the reason it's played so often is because it's so compelling to listen to. You know, sometimes we can know this music so well that we stop thinking about it. On our last concert, Kevin Murphy and I, Kevin, who's been at every major opera company in the world, working with the musicians there and knows Mozart operas really well. When we were talking about the Magic Flute Overture, I asked Kevin, I said, you know, that I said, what happens if you put the little turn in front instead of at the end? And you have you have the Queen of the Night aria. And he was like, wow, I never realized that. And he said, sometimes you know this stuff so well that you just stop thinking about it, right? So this is the genius of these composers, to be able to turn stuff upside down, put it on its side, put something familiar underneath that you don't even realize you're hearing. That's why these things are so compelling to listen to, because even if you aren't consciously aware of it, your mind is processing all this stuff because you've heard these melodies at one point or another earlier, and now they're coming back. So I think that's why these pieces are so engaging. So that's a little bit of an insight into the Dvorak New World Symphony. I want to thank Andrea. Andrea was practicing all the stuff for Richard's presentation, and then this weekend I said, can you switch and just learn some stuff from the symphony? So we should thank her for her playing today. And does anybody have any questions about these two pieces or the, yes?
What was the number of the Mozart concerto?
21. So 21st Piano Concerto, K467, right? Yeah. Anybody else? No? Well, thanks for coming, and I hope you enjoy the concert on Saturday, and let's all stay dry. Bye-bye.
Okay, just before you leave, I just wanted to give you some reminders of upcoming events. So, of course, this weekend we have the Dvorak concert, and then there's also a pre-concert lecture at 6:30. The next musical Monday is November 15th, and that's at the Cube, PSO Cube, which is the WTVP building, at 7 p.m. And that's Women in Music. We will have our residents and composer in residence, Stephanie Ann Boyd. She will be there with a guest artist, violinist Sienna Wang. I hope I pronounced that right. And then December 1st, of course, is going to be our holiday luncheon. It'll be at the Country Club of Peoria this year. And then we're not going to be doing refreshments at intermission at the Grace concert this October, but we are taking sign-ups for the March 12th concert at Grace, hoping that we can do that at that time. So contact any board member and let them know that you're interested, and we can get that sign-up going. Thanks so much for coming, and thank you to our guest artists and Maestro Stelluto, but most importantly, all of you. Thank you.